Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, the Hacker's Lens, uncovering risks in your internal attack surface. I'm Dara Reynolds from CommSec, and I'm proud to host this session in partnership with Checkpoint Software, global cybersecurity leader and a strategic partner of CommSec. Today, we're focused on a growing blind spot in many organizations, that's external risk. And that's part of your footprint that the hackers can see first. So this includes breach credentials, phishing websites, and exposed systems and vulnerabilities. So that's the problem. And most businesses have no idea what's exposed until it's too late. So that's why we're all here today. So what we're going to go through today is we're going to show you identify what hackers can already see, prioritize the risks that matter, and take action using the Gartner CTEM framework. And as a bonus, all attendees today can request a external risk assessment for your organization. So hang on till the end of the webinar for details on how to claim. So with that out of the way, let's kick off. So today I'm delighted to be joined by two expert speakers. We have Michael Muldowney and Barnaby Nichols, both of Checkpoint Software. They'll introduce themselves as they share their slides. First of all, we'll go through the agenda. So we'll have our quick introductions, and then we'll see where external risk fits into our cybersecurity strategy and get a bit of background around Checkpoint and a company called Cyberint. Then we'll have a look at the external risk management, how to use the CTM, and we'll finish up with some Q&As. So for those who are not aware who we are, CommSec is a specialist cybersecurity partner. We run a 24/7 managed SOC operations out of our offices in Blanchardstown in Dublin. So we're an Irish company supported by our team based in Dublin. And our standards include ISO 27001, Cyber Essentials, and we help our clients align to NIS2 and DORA, the new regulations coming from the EU. And we've got clients predominantly in Ireland, UK, EU, Asia, and North America. And our industries that we support include software, financial, logistics, fintech, public bodies, among others. And our end-to-end cybersecurity services are covered under the 4 pillars. So I mentioned our SOC. We've also got a security testing through pen testing and vulnerability scanning managed service. We also have professional services that includes CISO as a service, data protection as a service, and as I mentioned, our cybersecurity framework gap analysis. And then today, what we're talking about falls under our third-party solutions of that Checkpoint, our strategic partner. So here's some of our valued clients, some of the big names you'll recognize from our website and other webinars that we've done. So we're just going to run a quick poll now. So just bear with me while I load this up, and we'll bring in our speakers. So just related to today's webinar, our poll is as follows. Which of these external threats concerns you the most today? Breached credentials, phishing websites and brand impersonation, unpatched vulnerabilities, or AI-powered attacks? So that's should be able to see that there now on screen. So I'm going to bring Michael in now. Michael, if you'd like to share your slides, introduce yourself.
No problem. Thanks, Dara. Thanks, Dara. You can see my slides, can you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm Mike Muldowney. I am the Channel SE for Checkpoint in Ireland. I've been in the cybersecurity industry 20 years now. 17 of those years was down here in Cork with McAfee. but I'm not a Cork man, as you can see there. I'm a very happy man, and that's why you can probably hear a hoarse voice. Very happy man there. I'm a proud tip man, exiled down here in Cork. But the last 3 years, I have been working as the channel SE for Checkpoint here in Ireland. Not everybody knows Checkpoint. So even though we're one of the largest cybersecurity organizations in the globe, we started out 32 years ago. We invented the first firewall. And we're probably best known, I suppose, in that network security firewall space. We're a leader in network security. But as you'll see, over the years, through organic growth and through acquiring companies, we have become a full cybersecurity platform to be able to protect our 100,000 customers that are in over 182 different countries across endpoints, network, cloud, email, mobiles, IoT devices, etc. So we've established ourselves with a full cybersecurity platform and a leader in cybersecurity industry. We've seen lots of different mutations, every technique, every attack that's happening over the years, and we have an immense data lake of intelligence that we use to on a daily basis to develop and to deliver the best security for those 100,000 customers. We're recognized by lots of leaders. We're a leader in lots of different areas, from the analysts, as you can see there. It's not just the network side of things, leader in the email side of things, zero trust, mobile, endpoints. So the full portfolio has been built out across our Infinity platform. So that's what we call it, one Infinity platform, where we have one unified management. So every customer gets one unified management, and then they're able to protect all of their firewalls, or they're putting their firewalls in the cloud, or web application firewalls, or any of those solutions that I mentioned there at the endpoint, at the mobile, a SASE solution as well. Everything's managed from one Infinity platform and underpinned by that threat cloud AI that I was talking about, where we have collaborative intelligence sharing across the globe, all of those 100,000 customers, deciphering if something is malicious and pushing out that within seconds to all of the other customers. So every customer will get an Infinity platform, which can be spun up from a data residency point of view in 7 different regions, including Ireland, as you see here. Then you go in and you manage your gateways, you manage your solutions that are protecting your endpoints, or protecting your mobile. Very good email solution. We bought a company called Avanan as well. Phishing is another attack surface or attack vector that's happening a lot, and it's where a lot of the actual attacks are coming from. So if you want to talk about our email solution, but the one here we're going to talk about today is our external risk management, and that's the latest kind of crown or jewel that we have in our crown. So we bought a company called Cyberint, and we'll talk about them, and Barney's going to talk about those. But just to talk a little bit about that intelligence, and the brain behind everything is the threat cloud. So as I said, we're leveraging the millions of gateways and the mobiles and the endpoints, and you're looking at lots of big figures there. You're looking at trillions of websites, loads of emails, loads of file emulations, loads of domains, deciphering if something is malicious across the 50 AI engines that we have, pushing that out within seconds across the globe to be able to protect those 100,000 organizations. So if you break it down a little bit more, lots of firewalls, firewall for all occasion, I like to say. So whether you're a small SMB or a branch firewall you're looking for, or a perimeter firewall, or a mid-level enterprise firewall, right up to the very big data center firewalls, or if you want to put your firewalls in the cloud and spin them up in the cloud, or have a web application firewall, or even over here in the Harmony solution that we talked about, being able to protect your users as well. But this is where the external risk management comes into it. And we bought a company called Cyberint. So we hear a lot about breaches on a daily basis. So where does this external risk come from? You know, we've heard a new breach nearly every day, whether that be big companies like Marks and Spencers or Harrods, or I heard the other day about Google losing 16 billion passwords, or right down to your small SMB or whoever you are these days. Nobody seems to be safe. It doesn't matter what sector you're in, whether it's healthcare, manufacturing, education, all of these organizations face critical security breaches. And these external risks are responsible for 83% of those breaches. So what we mean by external risks is, what can the attacker see when they sit down from the outside in? So what are they looking at? Where can they attack you? What is publicly facing? Where have you vulnerabilities? Do you know about your digital footprint? And And that's exactly where CyberIn sits. So it's looking at things like stolen credentials. So these days, a lot of times the attackers are not breaking in, they're logging in. So is there stolen credentials out there on the dark web? They're using these to attack every entry point of your organization. What about your brand abuse? Do we know if you have lookalike sites out there? Do you know if your executive levels are being impersonated on social media? Can you have reputational damage, financial loss from all of this? And finally, we also seem to hear a lot more about vulnerabilities. Dara was just telling me about a new one that was announced today in SharePoint on-prem. Every day there seems to be a new vulnerability, the same as there seems to be a new attack. So you need to be able to see and prioritize where we can detect and mitigate those. So this is where CyberIn comes in. CyberIn was formed in 2010, and it started as kind of a dark web monitoring service. And you can see there, then it kind of evolved into a platform in 2020, transitioned into more of a SaaS platform, not just doing dark monitoring, but going into more asset monitoring and external risk management. And it became a leader in Gartner and Forrester. So it's evolved into a full external risk monitoring platform. And that's where I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Barney, who came as part of the acquisition. We bought CyberIn for 200 million. And because we got Barney as part of the acquisition, that's probably why it cost so much. So I'll hand over to Barney now to take us through the external risk.
I don't know about that, Michael. I think it might be more, and then realise I'd still be around, so it's maybe the price dropped. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Darren. It's lovely to be here. Thanks, everyone, for your time. So I'm going to delve into a little bit more detail in reference to some of the topics that Michael has kindly already covered this morning. So the purpose of the next sort of 20-25 minutes or so is really for us to put ourselves in the mind of a hacker, in the shoes of the adversary. So we're going to start thinking like a hacker. We're going to start understanding what techniques they're using in order to identify vulnerabilities and risks in organizations, private sector organizations, public sector. As Michael said, it really doesn't matter to these hackers. They're looking to make money and they're looking to exploit the path of least resistance by utilizing any vulnerabilities in an organization's external attack surface. So what we'll look at today is get to know the adversary a little bit better in terms of how they're operating, and I'll show you some examples of that in the CyberIn platform, and then we'll start to understand how it's best for you folks to think about safeguarding, how you can better improve your visibility and increase your detection of external risks, and of course ultimately remove those external risks to limit the impact of ultimately being breached. Before we get into the details of what the adversaries are doing, I think it's important that we understand the context and the scene, and none of this will be surprising to anybody, I'm sure. But I think what's interesting is the sheer volume of ransomware incidents that we see across the world. And actually, a lot of that activity is concentrated across Europe, the UK and Ireland. And as we saw last year, there was a significant jump in the number of ransomware incidents that we were seeing on a global scale, an 11% increase in 2024 compared to 23, and we only expect that number to continue to rise as we head towards the end of 2025. But we do think there'll be ways in which we can start to get a bit more control over these numbers, and we'll visit that in the end in reference to the Gartner CTEM framework and how we can hopefully help limit the number of incidents that we see on an ongoing basis. But if we look slightly closer to home, you know, no region, no sector really is immune from this type of targeting and activity. This is some data we pulled from our platform recently, and you can see actually there's a real mix of sectors, of company size, and actually threat actors that are targeting the Irish market, as you can see from the list in front of you. But let's think about what is happening in the hacker community. How are they operating? And it might be surprising to a few that actually these threat groups, these threat actors, these hackers operate very much like an established corporate organization. So typically we see that threat groups have a level of hierarchy and leadership, of course, leading that business. And remember, these folks are doing these things typically for money, motivations, financial gain, etc. So we see that under the leadership, there are then specialized areas of threat actor groups. So for example, R&D, looking at new red teaming techniques to exploit organizations, looking at developing new strains of malware that can bypass the latest antivirus technology, for example. But then, of course, there are sales folks in these organizations, and if we think about how important that is, they can be as sort of targeted as they want, have as much success as they possibly can in terms of breaching organizations. But actually, if you don't get any return on that investment, if you can't go through that sales process, that sales cycle of actually negotiating with the victim organizations and agreeing on a ransomware price, then actually the return on that investment is not realized, and therefore they're not seeing the gains that they would expect to. So within these groups, you have the technical teams, you have the sales teams that are doing that negotiation, you have the finance teams that are managing those transactions, they're managing those crypto wallets to ensure that those transactions happen anonymously, and ensuring that they are distributed across the threat group, the organization, in the right way. And of course, hackers and hacker groups are always looking to recruit the most sophisticated and the most capable expertise across the extended community. So we see, and this is a screenshot from our platform, we monitored lots of dark web forums, as you would imagine, and what we see here is a job advert for a cryptographer that was available, and a position that was available recently. So what we see now is actually these threat groups are looking to offer significant financial reward for the best-in-class technical capabilities. But we also see that threat actors know the limit of their capability. So we do have some groups that specialize in what we call initial access brokerage, and that is actually the ability to gain initial access into an interface or into a network or into a platform, but they realize that that is the extent of their capability. They don't really want to traverse networks and move laterally across networks and exfiltrate data and hold people to ransom, because they don't have the level of capabilities that maybe some more established threat groups do. So they specialize in an area and they offer their service for that initial access, which someone can then buy, who then maybe does specialize then in moving through a network and understanding the privileges of different users to exfiltrate data or encrypt data, for example. So actually, there's a lot of complexity around the way that these groups operate, predominantly in the dark web, although we do see a lot of activity now in Telegram and in Discord, for example, as those hackers change the way that they are communicating. They take themselves really seriously. We saw that a large threat group actually paid $50,000 to an individual who identified a vulnerability in their infrastructure, in the hacker group's infrastructure. So they very much act like a corporate organization would, right? They're identifying where their risks in their infrastructure lie, and rewarding people that identify vulnerabilities across their infrastructure. And they're also a brand. They have to ensure that their brand is seen as reputable. They're seen as best in class. They're seen as the group that the next young upcoming hacker wants to go and work for. So something we saw last year in reference to Lockbit was they were promoting the brand of their threat actor group by paying $1,000 to individuals who went and got a Lockbit tattoo, as you see here. In fact, this campaign was so successful, I suppose. There were so many people doing this that they actually had to stop the campaign, because they were forking out significant funds for their community to promote the Lockbit threat group. Now, what's happening about this type of activity? Now, of course, governments are always looking to stop this type of activity. We've seen recent examples where very large threat groups' infrastructure has been taken down. This is a screenshot from their Onion site in the dark web that has been seized by the FBI. But what we see actually is this is a little bit like whack-a-mole. You know, they'll probably create a new site with new infrastructure in a matter of hours, days, weeks after this site has been seized. So the government is doing some stuff, but unfortunately we cannot rely solely on the actions of the regional governments, because we still see, of course, as we saw at the start, lots of attacks, lots of breaches, lots of ransomware events across different regions and different sectors. And actually, hackers have so much confidence in their capability. This was an individual that was identified by the FBI as being on the most wanted list, and he was quite confident in his ability to not be caught, that he printed off the wanted poster and shared and uploaded a picture of his office at home with that on his chair, just to maybe emphasize the fact that he didn't particularly feel threatened by those government agencies. So that's a bit of background, a bit of context, how they operate, but what specifically are hackers taking advantage of? So Michael touched on this at the top of the webinar in reference to the top 3 attack vectors. So just to reaffirm what those are. Stolen credentials, I think that was one of the most popular areas of concern in the poll that Dara ran at the start, in terms of the leak exposure of corporate credentials, because of course they can provide unauthenticated or malicious access to corporate interfaces, which of course can lead to a significant potential data breach or impact ultimately of someone with malicious intent accessing a corporate interface. Impersonation, this is a very, very common technique with the use of AI now. Actually, impersonation and social engineering is becoming increasingly sophisticated. If we think about 10, 20 years ago, we were probably receiving emails from Nigerian princes, you know, offering huge sums of money for seemingly little input. You know, those attacks are now much more sophisticated, much more targeted, much more focused on the recipient of a phishing email or a smishing text or a WhatsApp voice note, for example, to increase the chance of interaction with that phishing link, which can of course lead to downloading malware or giving away your PII or giving away corporate credentials, for example. And then finally, another common area of exploit and common source of a breach is the exploitation of externally facing assets that are vulnerable through a CVE or through hijacking, for example. So it's really important that organizations have visibility of not just these 3 things, but other areas of external risk. So I want to bring that to life a little bit now. So I'm going to share my other screen and I'm going to jump into the Cybrint platform, which is now part of the Checkpoint portfolio, Checkpoint External Risk Management. We're going to look at an example. This is all dummy data, but per Dara's comment at the start of the call, we have the ability to do this exercise and to see this data for your organization or actually any organization in the world. Because remember, we're looking at companies through the lens of a hacker. So we are replicating the tools, the processes that they're using to identify risks and vulnerabilities in organizations. So we don't need approval to do this. We're not doing anything active. We're doing a passive view of an organization's external risk. So how do we do that? So the first thing we want to understand is the attack surface. So I'm going to focus initially on how we understand an organization's attack surface. So we take the company domain. And the first thing we do is a discovery exercise, and that enables us to identify all of the externally facing assets that are clearly attributed to the main company domain. So we find all the other domains, the subdomains, the external IPs, the cloud storage environments, and these are all things that are visible to the outside world. They're visible to us, they're visible outside of the firewall, outside of the perimeter, therefore they're visible to a hacker. And hackers can do this process. We need to do it on behalf of our customers, so we get ahead of a hacker doing it for that company and identifying exposures, vulnerabilities, risks related specifically to those assets. Then we need to validate the asset belongs to the company. We don't want to create noise or false positives. And we also want to identify where an organization is using a particular technology. And that helps us identify where you may be vulnerable to CVEs, or in the event of a 0-day, you can very quickly understand where are you using a specific technology vendor, what version of that technology are you running, and importantly, what asset is it exposed on? Is it living on? So you can get ahead of a potential 0-day incident. So up to this point, this is all passive, but then we do have the ability with customer approval, of course, to do an active validation of exposure. So then what we can do is an automated pen test that enables us to verify and validate the exploitability of one of your externally facing assets. So we go and attempt to penetrate or exploit that asset. And we share the evidence as to how and if and why we could indeed exploit that asset. So you can prioritize your patching, your remediation efforts based on real world evidence. If we can exploit it, a hacker can exploit it. So let's have a look at some of the outcome of this exercise. So I'm now in the CyberInt platform. I'm in the attack surface monitoring pane. What this enables us to see, and what this enables our customers to improve first and foremost, is visibility. The amount of times that customers say, I didn't know that we owned that domain. I didn't know why it was associated to us. I didn't know it was externally visible. And if you can't identify your external attack surface, if you don't have visibility of these assets, you can't protect against them. So the first thing we're doing is helping increase visibility, improving visibility, and giving real-time understanding of your external footprint. These are all of the assets that a hacker sees. They see these domains, they see the subdomains, they see the external IPs, and they see your cloud storage environments. So we want to give you that visibility so that you can either reduce your attack surface, i.e. not make an asset visible to the outside world, put it behind a VPN, for example, put it behind a gateway if it doesn't need to be externally visible. But if it does need to be externally visible, helping you identify where that asset is at risk. So where an asset that we have identified is at risk for our customers is where we provision an alert. So an alert is something that needs review, needs action, because it has a level of risk for our customers. Now, risk can be categorized from low to very high, and we see some examples here. I'm not going to have time, of course, to go through all of these examples, but I'm going to touch on 2 or 3 of the most common ways in which an organization is indeed breached. So let's start with a vulnerability. And this is an example of how we can not only identify a vulnerability, but also actively validate whether indeed we can exploit it from the wild, replicating what a hacker could do. So in this instance, the first thing we've done is discovered an external IP. We share the attribution of that IP with the main company domain, in this case, prudential.com. And on that IP, we understand that a particular technology is being utilized, and that particular technology is vulnerable to a specific CVE. The CVE in this case has a high chance of exploitation and lots of interest across the hacker community in this CVE very specifically. So then what we do, and we share the evidence here, is we do an automated pen test essentially. This means we try and exploit the asset, and we share with you the response that we got from that exercise. This means that customers can action this risk based on the severity and based on the proven exploitability of this particular asset. You can see this is a very high severity because we've proven that we can exploit the asset from the outside in. And this is one of the top 3 ways, of course, in which hackers are exploiting organizations. The second is through credentials. So we see credentials leaked in many ways. On the dark web, for example, they may be exposed as part of a data dump, but they may also be exposed through a malware infection. So what we see here is a device that has been infected with malware, that is actually exposing the corporate credentials, the corporate activity of a particular user. So a malware steals not only the credentials, not only the URL that that credential relates to, but also cookie tokens. And this is critical because cookies can bypass MFA. Customers often say, yeah, we have MFA on our highest important login interfaces. So if the credential is exposed, then we're not too concerned. But if the leak comes from an employee machine infected with malware, then cookies can indeed be utilized to bypass MFA technology. The hacker can inject the cookie session into their own browser and trick the MFA technology into thinking that that authentication has already happened. So this particular risk type is significant for that reason, and also the fact that malware can also steal files from the device, password files. It can take screenshots from the device that exposes maybe the activity on that device. And we also understand additional data and telemetry around what operating system was used, where exactly is the malware installed, what antivirus was bypassed in order for that malware to successfully be installed on the device. And we also do some verification that that individual is still a member of the company in question. So this is another way in which organizations are being breached, through exposed credentials. But actually malware can be distributed typically through impersonation campaigns. And impersonation is the third way in which organizations are ultimately being breached. We'll take an example here. This is a simple example of an impersonation of Amazon. You can see the screenshot here. It looks pretty legitimate, replicating the login interface that Amazon used legitimately on their site. However, through a very quick, what we call forensic investigation, we see that the domain in question that we have identified, and we identified that through logo matching, is indeed a malicious URL. It was detected as a phishing site, and the parent domain has the same level of malicious historic context, and the parent domain has been hosted in an external IP that is also marked as malicious, and it has distributed a malicious file, malware. So that malware could be downloaded by me at home. I could be on a personal device. My kids could be on a personal device. They inadvertently click on a link that downloads malware. Now, it only takes me as a corporate employee at Checkpoint to maybe go and utilize that personal device that may be in the house to access something very quickly. Maybe my corporate device is rebooting. I go and use my personal device to access something very quickly. It could be SharePoint, my webmail, maybe my HR system to request holiday, for example. As soon as I start using that device for corporate activity, then of course my corporate credentials are exposed. And that is how the infection of malware from a Amazon phishing link could lead to a corporate incident. So that's an example of the top 3 ways in which organizations are breached, and how we can identify and detect these things so our customers can get ahead of a threat actor actually taking advantage of these exploits. Now, there's a lot more we do in reference to supply chain monitoring. We also do takedowns of phishing sites, and we provide lots of data and telemetry on the broader threat landscape, understanding who is targeting the Irish region, what hackers do we need to be aware of, what techniques are they using. So there's a huge amount of data and telemetry within the platform. And if we think about how we can further safeguard, I'm going to flip back to my presentation to finish my segment here. It's really important, we believe, that organizations are following a twofold approach. And the first is all about visibility. You cannot protect what you cannot see. So improving the visibility of your external attack surface, improving the visibility of where those assets specifically are at risk is really critical in identifying and ultimately removing risk and reducing the chance of being breached. And the second is to consider industry frameworks. Gartner, of course, is a leading example of an organization who are innovating in ways in which organizations can get ahead of the latest threats. So we talk a lot about something called CTEM. This is defined as continuous threat exposure management, as you can see. And on the right-hand side here, you can start to understand how the external risk management platform, the Cyber platform, can align very directly to the CTEM framework. And the first is all about visibility, as I referenced. What is your attack surface? What do you look like through the lens of a hacker? What is exposed beyond the perimeter, beyond the firewall? And therefore, where are you at risk? What threats specifically do you face? And then, of course, validating that those threats are genuine. Is the credential a live credential that can actually be used right now to access a corporate environment? Can the externally facing asset we've identified indeed be exploited from the wild, from a hacker, and validating those risks for you? And then enabling, of course, our customers to mobilize internally and reset the password, do a virtual patch, or whatever the relevant remediation might be. And I think it's great to understand, sorry, my screen went the wrong way there, the impact that Gartner believe following this framework will have moving forward. So I talked about at the start the increase from 23 to 24 in ransomware attacks, and I suspect that that number will only increase as we get to the end of 2025. But Gartner are claiming, and they strongly believe, that actually by following this framework, we can start to see a reduction, or at least a plateau, in the number of ransomware incidents that we're seeing. So Gartner believe that by 2026, there will be a significant reduction in those in breaches in organizations that are following the CTEM framework, that continuous understanding of your threats, understanding where you're at risk, and then, of course, importantly, taking action, mobilizing and removing and reducing those risks. So I'll stop there and hand back to Darren, who I think has got a final segment. Thanks,
Barnaby. Very, very insightful. Yeah, we just move on to our Q&A section now. So if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask, they can pop them into the chat box there. There's a couple have come in there through email while we're speaking. Let me just pull them up. Second. So we already have a vulnerability scanning tool. How is this different, and do we need both?
It's a great question. So vulnerability scanners are a very effective mechanism for identifying vulnerabilities in assets you know exist. And this is where the Checkpoint ERM and the Cyber solution can complement maybe existing vulnerability tools that you have in place. The reason for that is typically vulnerability management tools aren't capable of discovering newly created assets. What I mean by that, we had an example last week with a customer. Their marketing team had created a new campaign to launch a new product, and they created a new domain, new subdomains to host that promotional content. The IT, security and cyber team were not aware that that happened. Those websites, those domains were configured in a way that meant they were highly vulnerable to being hijacked, taken over. So our platform actually detected those newly created assets, and then we can monitor if they're exposed. So without that continuous discovery, you can't necessarily identify the vulnerabilities in those assets because you don't know they exist. So great question. Vulnerability scanners, very, very capable product and tool set, but it's really important that we also increase our visibility to make sure they're being pointed and directed at the relevant assets.
Yeah, you may already know this, but we offer a service called CheckScan Plus, which does manage vulnerability scanning of known assets, and it's very useful in the software development arena, particularly within the continuous improvement and testing of web apps. So that's kind of a good use case for it anyway. So we will move on. Can this help with regulatory frameworks like NIS2 and ISO 27001?
Yes, there are portions of those two frameworks that require a level of monitoring from a threat intelligence perspective and also a third-party supply chain perspective. Of course, we have capabilities in both of those. I think the other thing to understand is it also enables organizations to validate whether existing processes are working effectively. If you have significant data leaks, significant credential exposure, passwords that are unhygienic, it can really enable and enforce organizations to review their ongoing strategy. So, whilst absolutely we will contribute to the certification in some of those standards you've referenced there, also it's important to understand the bigger picture, because we don't want our customers just to tick a box for the sake of ticking a box. We want them to be able to continuously improve, and actually by utilizing real world data, real world exposures, that can be a great way to improve strategy and improve maturity across the wider business, to make sure that actually at times you can go above and beyond those standards and ensure that your risk is being reduced continuously.
Very good, very good. And theoretically, could you upload, say, a list of your suppliers to the platform and give you a risk score against those suppliers?
Yes, absolutely. So we will do continuous monitoring, actually. So not just a point in time assessment of those suppliers, but a continuous assessment, because an organization's risk today may be very different to tomorrow, for better or worse. So we want to continuously monitor our customers' key operational suppliers and provide them with alerting as to when those risks change, so they can get ahead of a potential breach.
Or any weak links in their supply chain. Very good. Michael, I have one for you. One came to mind there during the webinar regarding phishing websites and phishing links contained within emails. Would something like the Email Harmony product pick up on those?
Absolutely. So, I mentioned there we bought a company called Avanan. So Avanan are doing things a little bit differently. So as people move to the cloud now, they have a patented approach. So we connect in directly into the Microsoft tenant through an API, and then we create inbound and outbound connectors and mail flow rules that allow us to replace ourselves just before any of those emails go into the inbox. And then they're using that threat intelligence that I showed from Checkpoint, where we're looking at everything across the board and all of that big data native intelligence to decipher if something's malicious, even if it's a piece of malware that's coming in an attachment, send that into our sandbox, scan it, decipher if something's malicious, and then that helps us to block a lot more threats that are coming in the inbox before they actually get there. So absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks very much for that. So I think that's the end of our Q&A section. We'll just move on to the external risk assessment. So maybe Barney, would you like to give us an insight to what's included in that?
Yeah, of course, no problem. So as I referenced earlier on, we have the ability to look at organizations through the lens of a hacker, so using passive techniques to identify external risks that relate specifically to your organization. So if valuable, we're more than happy to run that process against your company and share with you what we deem to be external risks. And this can really help tangibly understand where the organization may potentially be vulnerable to an attack in the future. So I think, Dara, the call to action here is to contact CommSec, and we can organise that facility.
Sure, yeah. And after this webinar, we'll be sending out the recording with a number of resources contained within that email. So you can just reply to that email, or you can get in contact with us at sales@commsec.ie as well. So I think that's it. So look, thank you very much to our speakers today, Michael and Barnaby. Really great content, very important. I'd like to thank our attendees as well for their interest and their participation today as well. So like, we hope this session has given you a clear view into what hackers see when they look at your organization, from breach credentials, phishing websites, vulnerabilities, and then it was good to see the advent of the CTEM framework as well. So we now have a process that we can use to actually go and tackle these vulnerabilities as well. I think the key takeaway for me is, I think I have it written down here. Barnaby said you can't protect what you cannot see. So I think that's the big theme from this. But you're not on your own. There is tools there that can help. And with the free assessment as well, you can see what's out there at the moment for your organization. Very important. So if you'd like to speak to any of our team for a more in-depth demonstration, just reply to the follow-up email, as I said, and we're more than happy to help. So thanks again for your time, and stay safe.
Thanks, Sarah.
Just
Thanks, guys.